Welcome to the Talking with Tech podcast. My name is Chris Bouguet, and I'm here with the famous gamer, Rachel Madel. How's it going, Rachel?
Oh my God, Chris, no one's ever called me a famous gamer before. Thank you for that honor.
What's your Twitch handle?
Chris, what is Twitch? Just kidding. I know what Twitch is, but barely.
So I have some news when it comes to Twitch. So those of you that don't know what Twitch is a website where gamers watch other people game, and there's a whole commenting stream that you can participate in and kind of chat alongside. And of course, the videos can be recorded so you can watch them after the fact. But really, the platform for Twitch is to watch live stream gaming, right? And I have a person that it plays on Twitch is going to be coming on the podcast, Rachel. I'm in the works right now. Once upon a time, I got to go to Australia, and I got to present and talk about AAC, and there was a student with cerebral palsy that has now grown into because this is several years ago, grown into a big gamer. And so I was noticing him streaming and playing on Twitch, and I hit him up recently, and I was like, hey, man, remember me, you know? And he's like, yeah, of course, because we've stayed in touch. He's in kind of the same stuff I am, Marvel and that kind of stuff. So we've stayed in touch, and I was like, hey, dude, I noticed that your Twitch, you've got a Twitch platform, and you're saving your videos to YouTube, and you're on Discord, and this is all stuff that could really kind of help a lot of people that are listening to this podcast understand what some of these tools are. So that's something to look forward to.
That's amazing. I mean, we're gamers over here at Talking with Tech, so it's only natural that we have some celebrity gamers come on the podcast.
So let's talk about it then. So Rachel, what are some of your favorite games?
Well, I wanted to share one specific story, Chris, because I feel like we've all had this situation where, a team member, a parent, someone says they're just not motivated by anything. And I feel like that's a very common thing that I hear. I'm sure all of our listeners are like, yes, I hear that all the time. So similar student, everyone's like, he's not motivated by anything. And so I, have been trying to figure out ways that I can incorporate his interests into the work that I'm doing with him. And this student just happens to be very motivated by elevators, which before we started recording, Chris, I asked, do you have a lot of autistic students who are really interested in elevators? And you said no. So maybe this is just my experience, but a lot of my autistic students love elevators.
Well, maybe the incidence is on the rise.
I mean, I'm not sure, but regardless.
That was a dad joke. It totally landed flat.
Oh, dad joke. Incidence on the rise. Okay with the dad jokes. I'm busy. I'm busy talking about real things over here. Just kidding. I love your dad jokes. But anyway, so, this student, very interested in elevators. And I really fully believe when we're trying to figure out what language targets and what vocabulary, build off of a student's strengths. Build off of what students are already communicating. So this student, in order to, I'm sure he's thinking in his head about being in an elevator and what button he wants to push. Because he'll say 1, 2, 3, parking. He'll just say the floor that I think he probably wants to push. So, over the course of the last couple months, I have tried to figure out as many different games that have elevators and videos that have elevators. I've been really going all in with this elevator special interest. And I've taught him how to say so many things. He's an AAC user, also has some verbal speech, but not always consistent or intelligible. And he's now being able to say, go to first floor, go to second floor. And now we're working, because he would say, go to 1 floor, right? So we're working on first, second, third, fourth. And there's an app called Super Elevator. This is a free app. It's super basic, but you basically put these little pretend people in an elevator, and then it has an arrow and it has a number next to the arrow, and it has either goes up, so it's up to 9th floor, then it will go down, and you go to this certain floor and the people get out, but there's an element of gaming in it, in the sense that you have to hit it at the exact right moment for it to stop at the floor, otherwise it's missed floor, game over. So I use this in sessions when I'm doing work telepractice wise, and this student loves it. He is obsessed with this game. I've taught him so much language. Now he says, get in, for the people to get in the elevator, get out. We're using all types of core language with this, and really like building off of what he says, and it's actually translating. Like Mom's saying when he goes to, the elevator, he's like, go to the first floor. And now sometimes he just wants to sit in the elevator and ride it up and down, and Mom's like, we gotta go. But now he has the language. And, I took that simple thing of just listening to him and what he's saying spontaneously and building off of that. And look how far we've come.
It makes me wonder, first of all, it makes me remember the old game that I grew up with called Elevator Action. Have you ever played Elevator Action?
No, tell me more.
So it's, back when there were arcades, right? And I guess there still are arcades. You just don't see them as frequently as back when I was growing up. Elevator Action was a game where elevators were going up and down, and you were a little character trying to get away from the bad guys, right? They were trying to, rob the building or something. I can't remember the exact plot behind this scrolling game that moved back and forth. But the fact is there was elevators involved. And then a similar game to that, also in a similar era, was a game called Burger Time. Did you ever play Burger Time, Rachel?
That sounds familiar. And I also used to love going to the arcade, on the weekends. That was my favorite thing. The arcade and Blockbuster.
So Burger Time was, again, this sort of similar to a Donkey Kong. I feel like both of these are sort of rip-offs of Donkey Kong, where you're going up and down. This is not elevators, but it's ladders up and down. And then you run across different pieces of the burger to make the burger, right? So at the bottom level, floor number 1, if you're talking about elevators, go to the bottom is the buns, and then you go up to the second floor, and that's where the patties would be, and you could run across them. And of course, you're being chased by other pieces of hot peppers and eggs and pickles are chasing you around because you're the chef who's trying. And then you could stop them by throwing salt on them, right? That would stop them. In the same way that if you ate something in Pac-Man, right, the little power pellets, it would stop. But my point being is that there's tons of games like this, and that you can totally find something that is based on somebody's interests and go from there. What are they interested in? What are they motivated by? Let's play a game about that, as opposed to I'm going to you got to see my fingers in air quotes. Let's do an activity related to it. Start with their interest, do an activity, great. But even a level up from that would be, let's play a game surrounded by your interests. So that kind of takes the pressure off, because games are fun, right? Their games are just about having fun.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I know nothing about this app, Super Elevator. It's not this widely known resource that so many people are using, but what I did know was my student was obsessed with elevators, and I did a quick search in the App Store to see what comes up when I search elevator. And actually, I downloaded 4 or 5 different elevator games. Super Elevator happens to be my favorite, but it just goes to show that even students with highly specialized interest, we can take that and do a little bit of legwork to see, are there games out there or apps or websites or books or videos that can support that specific interest.
Now, there's one other thing I'd love to talk about when it comes to games, and that's kids making their own games. So let's just say you and I were brainstorming about this particular student that you're working with, right? I could totally see you working with one of his parents or a sibling, or even the student themselves if you were in person with them, where you take a manila folder, right? You open it up, you take now if they're practicing some sort of fine motor activity, I could see taking a quarter or a some sort of we were talking about tiddlywinks once on the podcast, remember, some sort of circular object, and you could trace around it. OTs rejoice, right, as you're circling around, and you're making a path using this circular object where you're circling that little object, making a path on this manila folder, and then you could roll dice to see, to play the game. And periodically you can have waypoints, things that you'd practice. And in your students' case, since they love elevators, what I could totally picture is making little slits on the back of on the manila envelope, cutting out the manila folder, cutting out a little piece of paper that is, and let's make an elevator. And then you could slide it in between these little slits that you made to make the elevator go up or elevator go down. So if you're like, oh, you rolled a 5, you landed on the elevator's going up, and you actually pull the piece of paper up, pulling them to the next level on the game that you've made. But I just think making games that you can go back and play with your family, or that you can give to somebody else, like, hey, let's make this game, let's play it a few times, but then let's go give it down to kindergarten, let them play with it, or trade it with somebody. Making a game for an authentic audience, I think, was really motivating for a lot of kids.
Yeah, and I think that, making something automatically, you are customizing it to that specific student, which they're more interested and motivated. This guy loves the parking level. So he's so disappointed on every elevator game when I pull it up and he's like, go to parking. And I'm like, there's no parking level, buddy. But I could see if we made his own elevator game, we for sure would include a parking level, P1, P2, P3, because he's always thinking about those when he's communicating about the elevator. He's very disappointed that there's no parking level.
I totally pictured the manila envelope being opened up, or the manila folder being opened up, him drawing a little car and cutting it out. And that starts at the top, right? And then a path that snakes its way all the way down to the bottom where you get to the parking level, with elevators in between. So if you roll a certain number or you spin a certain number and you land on the elevator, it drags you down a level. Oh my gosh, you got to go down in a chutes and ladders sort of way, right? And then eventually you made it to the parking level and you got out, or you got to park your car before you went off to go to dinner with your family, or whatever the next part of the story is. But I think that would be super fun. It'd be super creative to make, and I think really motivating for a student that has an interest like this.
I love it. I'm inspired now. I'm going to create an elevator game with him, and it's going to include parking levels.
Awesome. You got to invite me. I want to play.
Done. Okay, Chris, before we head into today's interview, because it's all about games, which is why we were inspired. I was inspired to share this story. I want to take a second and read some of the reviews. So we have been asking all of our Talking with Tech listeners, if you love this podcast, please, please, please rate us on iTunes and leave a review. And I wanted to share because we have a few new reviews that I absolutely love. The first one comes from Karate Mom 35. I'm assuming she says, I know this podcast is geared more towards educators and SLPs, but I found it immensely helpful to learn strategies to help me become a better member of my child's IEP team. There are so many nuggets of wisdom that have helped me view interventions differently, as well as communication needs of my child. Would definitely recommend this podcast for anyone who's seeking to become a better communication partner, a better advocate for their child, and have a better understanding of how to be an important part of the disability community. Which I just felt like was so great. And you're right, this podcast, we do tend to talk to our listeners like they're SLPs, educators, but I do think there's a lot of parents who listen.
Yeah, I think what's so exciting about that particular review is that this person now feels more informed to be able to go to an IEP meeting and speak with their team, right? And that to me feels like we're bringing people closer together. So that is so I know people can't see it. Hopefully they can hear it in my voice, the giant smile that's on my face from hearing that review.
We also have another review from a parent, Chris. This one is from SLP Mom Rose, who says, Talking with Tech is my favorite podcast to listen to. I am a mom to an 11-year-old AAC user, an SLP graduate student, and a self-professed AAC nerd. I first began listening to Talking with Tech in 2018. Wow, she's an early adopter of our podcast. She's a super fan. While driving to and from the ASHA convention in Boston, I have loved seeing how the show has evolved over the past few years and the many, many amazing guests you've interviewed. I especially love when you have AAC users on the show, as their insight is invaluable. Thank you for the amazing work you're doing in sharing information and helping further AAC knowledge and practice to so many. I love your New Year's goals, as I do think there are so many professionals who are still not familiar with AAC or who have only a very basic understanding of AAC and would benefit so much from listening to this podcast. I would love to see more episodes addressing the special challenges for users who need alternative access methods. My son is an auditory switch scanner, and there's so little information available to support users in learning and using this access method. So yeah, I think that's a great point too about the alternative access. I think we should have some interviews surrounding that topic, Chris. I feel like we can definitely do our part to, talk to clinicians and parents, AAC users, and really highlight that perspective, because I feel like it's one that a lot of us clinicians are working with alternative access. So I think that we can definitely build that out in the new year.
I could not agree more. Talking about alternative access sounds like a great idea here in the new year, so let's make it a point to do that.
You know what else sounds like a great idea, Chris? Having all of our listeners write us a review. So if you haven't already and you love this podcast, please go over to iTunes, click on ratings and reviews, and tell us what you think. We're committed to reading all of our reviews on air. Also, I have to tell you, Chris, I went on yesterday to see like any new reviews, and I was having a really grumpy kind of day. Like, just things weren't going my way, and I started reading the reviews, and I was like, wow, the work I do matters. So it really does make us happy. It makes us smile, and we really appreciate it.
I appreciate that you took screenshots of those and texted them right over to me, because then that made my day yesterday. So that was fantastic.
Awesome. Okay, Chris, tell us a little bit about what the interview's on today.
So back at ASHA 2021, one of the presentations that I was fortunate enough to participate in was with Beth Poss and Tali Kellerstein. The three of us put on a presentation all about games and gaming. And so this is an interview with Tali talking about some of the same topics we talked about at ASHA 2021. Hey there! If you love listening to this podcast, we would be so grateful for your support to keep it going. By becoming a Patreon member, you can not only help us cover the cost of this podcast, but you can get some really great bonus content as well. We post video tutorials, behind-the-scenes recordings, and bonus segments from our interviews. We would love for you to join us by going to patreon.com/talkingwithtech. That's patreon.com/talkingwithtech. Welcome to the Talking with Tech podcast. My name is Chris Bouguet, and today our special guest interview is Tali Kellerstein. Tali, am I saying your name right?
100%, yes. Yeah, really happy to be here.
So Tali, let's talk a little bit about how you and I know each other, which is we've actually never met in person. Is that true? Well, actually, we have met in person, but right, tell me more about that. Remind me how we met.
I first saw you on Lesson Pix's YouTube, like their evening videos, and you had made a presentation with Beth on games. Yes. And that was the first time I had watched you, and I watched that, and I was like, oh, this is my people. This is my people. You speak my language. I get it. And then Beth introduced us more formally for the ASHA presentation that we just did.
And then we presented it at ASHA together, which was super fun, right? I mean, did you have a great experience?
Loved it. So my first dipping my toes in ASHA, and I'm hooked. So I'll be there every year from now on.
So you and I know each other just a little bit, but for all the people that are listening, let's get them to know you a little bit. So who are you and what do you do?
Okay, so I am a speech language pathologist from Toronto. I have my own little small private practice called the Speak Boutique, and I work primarily with kids with speech sound disorders. And really at this point, it's pretty much exclusively with kids with speech sound disorders. Been a speech pathologist for around since 2005, Chris. I can't do the math today. For a long time. And I love it. And the other piece of my practice, so it's part clinical. And in 2020, I released my first book. And so the Speak Boutique became a publishing establishment as well. So I've self-published a book, and subsequent to that, a poster and a couple of boxes of a box of a game and a flashcard. And I'm super excited because I've got another game in the works now. So,
oh, fantastic. I want to dig into all of that stuff. But before we get to those things, let's talk about how you got interested in speech in the first place. Like what was your driving factor to make this your life path?
So I've always really been interested in language and communication, which I probably is true for just about everybody in our profession, probably like cliche. But before I was a speech pathologist, I did my master's in English, and I thought I was going to go into academia. I really liked books and literacy, and I was going to be a professor. And as a side gig, I started teaching ESL, so English as a second language, and absolutely loved it. And then I like really distinctly remember this one kid who now I know was velar fronting. And at the time, I was supposed to teach him English sounds and he couldn't say them. And so I started to get more and more interested in the granular of communication, not the big lofty ideas of academics, academia with English. And now it was like the granular, like, why is this kid not able to make a t? And that started that pursuit of speech. And I found my home in here.
Now, what we're really going to talk today about is games. So how did you get interested, with making that original connection, and then now with what you do when it comes to games and gaming and playing games?
Yeah, I guess it really flowed very naturally. When I was teaching ESL, games were a popular vehicle for pedagogy there. It was motivating. It was inherently motivating, inherently interactive. You could vary up any theme that you were talking about, make it a game, and you had your students hooked. And so I think I already came into speech with very much a bias to that end. And my first job coming out of grad school, I got really lucky. And I got a job at a place at the time it was called the Toronto Children's Centre, and now it's been rebranded as the Speech and Stuttering Institute. And their philosophy was this very literacy-rich approach to speech therapy. The kids there we were seeing for speech sound disorders and for language, specifically motor speech disorders. And we would pair our books with a game. And, if anybody's been following me on social media, that is my shtick. That is what I do. And I just found it such a compelling way of doing therapy. Everything tied well together. Whatever vocabulary you were introducing in the book, you could reinforce with the games. The children's targets are at the heart of my therapy, right? What I'm targeting in their speech, that's at the heart of my therapy. But it's presented on a platter of a book, and then that book is expanded in the game. And that's kind of signature what we had done at Speech and Stuttering Institute, and it has carried forth with me. And then I can sort of see that games are universal in that way. As just part of market research for my business recently, I put out a survey among speech pathologists about what are the products they use most in their practices, and put our usual flashcards, books, games, workshops. Games was the only one that was absolutely universal. Every single person who answered that survey uses games. It's universal within our field and outside of our field. And I just think they're so powerful as a vehicle for teaching and for instruction and learning.
I know one of the things we mentioned during our presentation was that it's cross-cultural. Like every culture has games. So
yeah.
Everyone seems to love games. There might be different types of games that people drift towards, but everyone seems to love games. So let me dig into what you said there a little bit and maybe you could give us a practical example, because you said like you wrote a book and it ties to a game. So if a speech therapist is like, wow, wait a second, I'm listening to this and I certainly work with books and I certainly work with games, but I don't really tie those two things together. How are you tying them together? What does that look like if I was a student coming to one of your sessions? Like, what is your book and how does that tie to a game?
So I could, I'll talk about for Party Animals specifically. I would have, so Party Animals is a collection of 21 speech sound poems. So all of these are very, very alliterative poems that are heavily saturated with whatever target sound that I have there. So I have one for, which is all about a puppy. So let's just start with that one. So for example, I have a kid who's coming in for working on bilabials, and they need to get bilabial closure, a good bilabial closure for that P, and maybe they're at the level of a two-syllable word. So we're doing a puppy. And so the poems are structured so that every stanza ends with the word puppy. So it's like party, puppy, powder, puppy, whatever the words are. The reason I did that was because some children just need to work in motor speech. Some children will just need to repeat a single word over and over, and they can just handle puppy. And so basically I've built the poems as a closed sentence where they can say puppy over and over. It's because that's how I've been using books. I'm not following whatever's written on the text in the specific book. Like I love the That's Not My series. And so that's not my puppy. That's exactly what we're doing, right? That's not my kid says puppy, right? And you've got puppy over and over. And then you have the bonuses of, the kid can feel or whatever. And so in this poem, we have puppy over and over. The images tell the story. And so that gives my students a way to either they can say the whole stanza. So I might, the story of the puppy in this, in the book starts with, I'm just showing Chris. I know you guys can't see it, but I'll just show Chris what it looks like. So the whole narrative is here.
Gotcha. So the book is pretty large. It's, it's what, 8.5 by 11 or larger?
Exactly. It's 8.5 by 11. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So printing sheet size paper, and in each poem, we'll have something like pom pom puppy, paw paint puppy. And so I'm describing that the puppy has a pom pom on her party hat. She's painting her nails. And the images tell the story of the puppy getting ready for the party. And so basically what I've done is taken a whole storybook and put it on a page so that a speech pathologist can have 21 books in one book. And then how would I follow this up with a game? I pick a game that's thematically related. So there's a bazillion games about dogs, right? Any game with a dog would work. There's a game called Pugs. Oh, I think it's called Pugs Party. The exact name escapes me right now, but I can put it in the comments after, where you're feeding a pug these little chips, and then he grabs one. You've got the element of surprise. Fits in perfectly, especially because I have a pug as one of the party guests here. And so I would take either the party theme, or let's say, for example, you're working in a group and you have multiple targets. Your story, you might pick a theme that fits in that target. So maybe food is a good theme because there's an image of the puppy pigging out. And so food can still tie into that theme. I'm pulling themes from the stories and then putting that in my game. And what's really the key for what goes together besides the theme is what level of language either of those things are at. So you heard me describe, like, either I'm looking at single words, or I'm looking at a little phrase, or I'm looking at a more descriptive kind of task. The game that I'm picking is going to match that level. So when it's a single word game, let's say we're working on bilabials, you could do that Diggity Dog Game. I don't know. Do you know that game?
No, tell us more.
So Diggity Dog is effectively a memory game. You have a board with a bunch of magnetic bones that are upside down and 4 puppies, and they pick up the bones with their noses.
Okay.
So I have 4 different puppies. So I have puppy and pick up and bone, like so much opportunity to practice those lips together for bilabials. Mm-hmm. And so if I have a child who's working on sort of that little phrases, little sentences, that's a perfect game to follow up with this story. For the child, it all works together, right? Like when they're working in school, they're also working in thematic units. Things are linked together. And I'm also seeing the game as a continuation of our conversation. We were talking about puppies in the story. We're going to talk about puppies in the game, but I'm going to match the level. So if I'm working with an older child, like it's possible a child with childhood apraxia of speech may still struggle with bilabials as a 7-year-old, as an 8-year-old. I need to make puppies interesting for the 7-year-old, 8-year-old, if it's kind of older. In my world, older child. I know in other kids, in other worlds, that's a younger child. But I'm going to take maybe a National Geographic story about puppies, and we would talk about it there, or look through a book and describe each puppy. That's a spotty puppy. That's this kind of puppy. So I've taken that level for that kid. And then when I'm picking a game, I would also pick something that complements that language level. I do recognize that, I'm in a really wonderful position because I have my own private practice. I have my real estate. I have my space. So I can invest in games that really coordinate well with whatever book I pick. And I realized that that is not necessarily realistic for a school-based speech pathologist, where you have a very mixed caseload and maybe not all the real estate. I mean, it really, I guess, depends on where people are working. And so part of the idea in my line was to try to put the magic, like the best ingredients of the books and games that I'm using, into one product that, you know, is portable for the school-based speech pathologist, or is, you know, an easy grab, that you can still get that literacy-rich therapy where you continue the conversation with a tie-in game, and make it very easy and accessible for speech pathologists across the board.
Ollie, let me make some AAC connections too, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
So one clearly is, like, when people hear you say bilabials, and they're like, well, but maybe the kids that I'm working with aren't really practicing. We're not practicing motor speech here. We're not exclusively, let's say. The other connections you could be making, which I find is very sparse, is for students that use communication devices, is actually opening up the keyboard and learning where the P is and the P sounds is, because puppy might be a little bit more fringe vocabulary word. But we could, in the books and in the games, we're still using core vocabulary. And then we're going over there or practicing our fringe vocabulary by spelling out those words and hitting that P repeatedly, which I feel like is, I'm pretty confident that's not widely happening anywhere, right? I hope there's somebody listening going, well, Chris, I do that. Great. If you do that, put it in the comments, let us know. But this could be a sort of a systematic way of doing that, is looking through, sort of using those same speech sounds, but using them in a phonemic awareness sort of way, embracing the keyboard. Does that sound reasonable?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I could totally see that connection, especially with the saturated nature of the sounds.
Absolutely. All right. So let me ask you this. You've been implementing games. Oh, wait, one other thing, another brainstorm I had when you were talking about the materials and the space and putting them a space. Something I don't find happens very often in school-based SLPs, but I wonder if this would not be a strategy, would be what I tend to see happening is a speech therapist gets their funds, or they use their own funds, and it becomes their materials, right? But I wonder, in a larger school district, if it wasn't a pool of materials and we shared them around like a resource library, and people just sort of check them out. So you're checking out the games and the book that's associated with the games. There could be like a little index card that, or maybe a QR code that goes with the game that shows a little video of how it's being implemented or something like that. How does that resonate with you?
I really love it. It's a couple of ideas sparked from there. One, that's how, when I say I was so lucky to have worked in the first place that I did, it was because we had that. We were a center of only speech pathologists. I have to describe, I just graduated. We were working in this house that was an old mansion owned by the hospital. So here I come. It's like a scene in a movie. You come down this long driveway and you end up at this mansion. And inside the mansion, at the front, where the lobby was, that's where we had our front desk. There were 3 organizations sharing this building. And we had our offices at the bottom, and upstairs in the bedrooms, that's where our therapy was. All the kids thought that we all slept there at night and that we all lived in these, we would go up the creaky stairs into our rooms. And we had about 15 speech pathologists, I think, in my organization, and then handfuls in the other speech organizations that shared the building. And that's essentially what it became, right? Because everybody said, oh, you're working on this kid needs help with like F and a low vowel. And this is like the perfect book. When you have this book, you're going to be able to repeat that sound over and over. Once you had that book, we were all like, ooh, and I know this game that goes with this. And we're really like kind of like wine pairing. This is the cheese and this is the wine, and this is going to be magic. And that was my working environment up until 2015. So for 10 years, my first 10 years of work, that was our culture and our philosophy. And it was so great because we were a team, but each doing our own individual masterpieces, right? Like we had our own caseload, but we were a team in terms of sharing ideas and really amassed this rich reservoir of ideas that, this is the perfect book for F. This is the perfect book for P. This is the perfect book for a kid just starting. This is great. And it was amazing. Learned so much without realizing that was happening,
That sounds amazingly collaborative, right? And everyone getting their ideas together. How did you share those ideas amongst each other?
So the way that the office was, so I think part of it was how our office was actually set up. So we never set up, I know like a lot of practices will put theme bins, right? So you'll have a bin of frogs and everything goes with frogs. So our setup was different. We had a library of games and a library of books, which meant that your specific book was never permanently married to a specific game. You kind of picked your book and then you would go to the game library and find what matched with it. It wasn't ever put in a box, so we never pigeonholed a specific book to. I'm not in any way criticizing. There's definitely a functionality to sorting things by theme and an ease of planning. Like it's just this. You asked why this worked. This is kind of how this worked because we our discussions were often around that and so it meant like if I had exactly like I'm saying with the puppy book, if I have a book about puppies, well, I can tie it in with a game about food and I can tie it in with a game about parties and I can tie it in with a game about puppies. There's a million ways to pull those themes. And it's the child's targets that drives which materials I'm picking, not the other way around. I'm not trying to squish in the child's targets into, it's Christmas now, we're going to squish it into Christmas. Like, no, we're going to, this is if it works with Christmas, amazing. But if Christmas works for me in May, I'm doing Christmas in May because that's the kid's target.
Yeah, 100%. So I always think of this as like what you're saying, a target first approach. Or I've used, since I used do so much work with language, a language first approach. Let me think of what the language or could be an articulation or a speech motor production target as well, right? So target first, not a theme first, right? Well, it's October, so we're going to do like costumes and pumpkins and stuff. No, that pick what works for the student. And then, what will be perfect for this is pumpkins because they're big and they're orange. Yeah. Those are the concepts we're trying to teach or whatever, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So that was very much like that. That was the culture that was the culture I was raised in. my speech pathology, childhood was there, and it worked really well. I had something that I just had an idea escape. It'll come to me. I'm going to say something non sequitur in a few minutes when that comes back.
We can always edit it back in that way.
Yeah. Perfect. You'll make me sound articulate.
Let me ask you this. So you've been using games now for years, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of your go-to strategies? So for instance, let me just give an example, right? So, did you think of what it was?
I thought it would.
Go ahead. Say.
So what I was going to say is that from the outside, if you look in, if you're looking on my Instagram or if you're looking on the outside in, it looks like, oh my gosh, you need so many materials. The truth is you don't. The truth is that when you find that magic game for R, that magic book for R, it is so reusable. Mm-hmm. And I don't photocopy and I'm not laminating and I'm not spending time doing printing. And I mean, part of that is thank you, Zoom and virtual. But when you have a good book, the reason we were all so excited in that collaboration, that collective environment was because when you found a book that was magic, like I have this book yesterday, There's a Bear on My Chair, which actually I found Lesson Picks had recommended that book. And it is amazing for air. There's, I don't know, probably at least 50 rhymes where you have air at the end of words. I never need to find another material to target air of the child. It's there forever. And that's what I love about games. Like they're so perennial. You just use it over and over.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you for accommodating that spark that just came a little late.
Yeah, I love that fact about games too, that they're so reusable and you just do it over and over and over again, and you can just kind of change them up. They're pliable, right?
They're pliable. Yeah.
All right. So let me ask, since you've been doing this for many, many years now, what are some strategies that seem to really work for you? And then maybe a part B to that question is, here's some things to avoid. Like if I'm a new speech therapist that's just implementing games, like you might want to be cautious of this. So what works and what doesn't? Okay.
So for me, first of all, there's one thing that applies for books for me and that applies for games, is that I really rarely actually read the text. I am, target first, right? I am thinking, what is this child working on? And so when I'm reading books, I'm not actually reading books. I am manipulating the story, the narrative, the pictures there to get the child to say what I need them to say and practice. And that's the same for games. I rarely actually read the instructions. If the instructions are so complicated that I need to read them, not a good game for therapy. We can put that in your question number 2 of what to avoid. Like I just don't have time for that. So I need a game that is really simple, that without reading it, I can, somebody had just told me, like, Instagram is about telling stories with a picture. A game should be the same thing. You look at it, you've told the story with the picture, you can run. And I can play a memory game with a child every single week. But if one week my memory game is about bears, and the next week my memory game is about cars, and the next week my memory game is about fire, and all these times we're working on R at the end of words, our post-vocalic R, and we've played a memory game every time, but it's a different memory game. This child's experience is not, I do the same thing in therapy every week. They haven't done the same thing in therapy, even though in my mind, we've played a game 3 times. That would be my one, my first thing. The second piece for me, where I think like really I veered off at the center compared to what I was trained in school, is to put away the flashcards. Flashcards, like, fine, they have a place. Like, I use them in my drills sometimes in the first part of therapy as the warm up. But the best advice I had gotten was put away the flashcards. We don't talk in flashcards, in set word that are selected, and you don't, whoever created those flashcards didn't have your specific child in mind. And also, when you embed those, my philosophy, I mean, like, if research proves me wrong, I'll take it. But my philosophy is that if you are embedding your targets into the actual communication activity, my game in my session is not my reward. That's not the reward for doing therapy. That is the therapy. And so my philosophy is that if we are embedding our targets into the game, our role is to change the level, right? Our role is to make the level harder or easier. And with time and practice, you can do that fairly naturally. If they're embedded, we are inherently working on generalization and carryover from the start. We're not saying there's going to be the step where we throw away the flashcards and now we're just having a conversation, because we have had conversations the whole time. Spin the arrow, take your turn, take your step, put on the snake, take off the car, put in this. We've always been having conversations. Just at the beginning, we had very repetitive conversations that were super predictable. As the kid advances in their targets, we're going to have less predictable conversation. We're going to have more variety in the words that we say. But we're still having conversation throughout. It is a philosophy. I don't know, there's not going to be piles of research supporting this, but that's kind of on the evidence-based triangle, the clinical experience, that's where I put mine.
Well, Tali, I think there's 2 other really important factors there, and that is flashcards are a tool, right? Yeah. But the strategy behind the tool is repetition, and you're getting repetition in a more, and this I think is the second point, a more fun, authentic way when you're actually playing the game than a drill and kill sort of thing. That's the sort of thing. Drill and kill is like, Oh man, they see you coming. Oh, I don't want to go do that drill and kill thing. But oh my gosh, we're playing memory, and
Yeah.
I'm using the same sort of because we're doing structured repetition, but they don't know it's structured repetition. It's just playing a game, right?
Exactly.
Now you have that engagement factor, and there I think is where we have some evidence to suggest that's what works, right? But it also brings in that joy factor, right?
Absolutely. And then I think the other piece of I have so many strategies. I'll give you a couple more if that's okay. We're good. So a couple other strategies. It's really worth investing in a dice that only has 1, 2, 3, that doesn't go to 6. It's a really good way to stretch your game. I love so if you're in a buy, if you do have those games where I sometimes will use the templates on lesson pick. So your game does become like a flashcard in that where you have your targets on every single square. But if I use a six number dice, then we're going to finish that game in 5 turns. Mm-hmm. I don't need it. So I want my dice to only go till 3. So I stretch that game out and have more opportunities for turns.
Can I just jump in there real quick?
Yeah, please.
So, because everyone knows I play Dungeons and Dragons, right? Which has many different dice. There are 4-sided dice you can get, which is I like the idea of here you could choose this dice or this dice. Do you know what I mean? And give them choice, because if you're going from like 3 or 4, and it's a different size, like a 4-sided dice is a triangle, so that's like sharp and pointy, and there's other things you can do with it. But what I really want to say about that is I like the idea of making your own dice, like out of a box. With bingo dabbers or whatever, because now this is my die. Okay, go hit your die, and then you're creating one that has 1 on 2 sides, 2 on 2 sides, and 3 on 3 sides. And I feel like that's a whole nother thing of now I own it. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and so many tips for customizing dice. Like you can grab a box, or you can buy big dice from the dollar store and stick on whatever you want for your targets. There's dry erase dice that you can use. I can have a whole podcast on dice. I'm sure you could too.
Maybe we'll roll that out later.
The other for adapting games. Memory. I just played this one the other day with the kids. So this is Mix and Match Bear by Ravensburger, and you don't have to. You can adapt the game to make it faster or slower. So when I'm playing memory games, because I have a book and a story retell and other activities in my session, my game is usually taking about 10 to 15 minutes. So a whole memory game with many, many cards, it's going to take too long for my purposes. So if you just leave the cards up, so now it's not a memory game anymore, it becomes a matching game, but you've now adapted that game to make it go as fast as you need. I think that's, especially when you're starting, your main skills to try to figure out how you can stretch a game and how you can, how you can contract a game and how you can expand a game, depending on where the child's at, where their interests are. The other beauty, I love doing games on virtual. I did not think that these physical games were going to translate to virtual therapy, but they actually translate beautifully. And I'd said in our ASHA presentation, somebody had pointed out, we as adults, we watch shows on YouTube, how to renovate your kitchen, I love House Hunters International, please give me a house in Barbados tomorrow. But I watch that knowing I am not going to live there and I am not going to buy this house, but I love it. And the same thing when we're playing physical games with kids virtually, they can see it's a 3D object. There's something not much more, but there's something just very motivating about it. And they play as if they're playing. If I've got a mystery bag and we're grabbing things from a mystery bag, I pull it to the camera. They pretend they're grabbing it. Fully, not less interactive than it was in person, and I don't have to wipe down everything after. So I
love that. It's just as immersive, right? Because
it's just as immersive.
And how often are they now giving you commands? Move it there or change that. That's
exactly.
They're getting to use it as a whole different pragmatic function. That oftentimes when they're actually in a physical space, they're following directions rather than giving them. It's language rich therapy, right? It's yes, I'm working on motor speech, but my context is always language because speech happens in language. And the other thing I love with virtual is that don't tell the kids, it is very easy to cheat. I just move my spinner and I put it so if I need a game to go faster,
it's off camera and our game is moving. And if I need a game to go slower, I can just do it off camera. And oh my gosh, we only rolled 2. Oh, well, bummer.
I love that. And there's another thing you touched on that I want to comment on. And that is, there's a phenomenon I think that's happening that people wouldn't have necessarily realized even 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And that is students like watching videos of other students playing games. So I know there's something, I'm sure there's a bunch of YouTube videos on this of kids playing games, but I know in particular there's a show that Will Wheaton used to do, or I mean, it's still about gaming, where it was like adults playing games. You'd watch them, and then occasionally you'd have kid-friendly episodes where it was kids playing games, like a Settlers of Catan Junior sort of thing. And I could totally see students like pausing that, watching that, commenting on the other kids playing. Just watching other kids play games, not even playing themselves, could be a great way to get to targets.
So I have to say, I have a child who loves video games, right? So he's introduced me to Among Us, and now he's introduced me to Bloons TD, and he really, really wanted me to download it on my phone, and it really got complicated for us to play together. I wasn't hitting our targets because we were, futzing with the game so much, and then I had an idea. Well, we'll watch somebody playing Bloons on YouTube. Didn't we have the best session? Like, I mean, no prep materials. Yes, you have to screen your YouTube videos before. It's important. But we were pausing every few minutes so he could explain to me what was happening. I had very much curated the type of things I was having him tell me, because we've got a lot of apraxia happening here, and I need to really tailor the things that are being said. It's not easy. Like, you do have to, when I have my games, like when I'm working on bear and I have a game with 30 bears, like I know I'm going to get that target up 10 times. When I'm working on blue, like with that same kind of target, but we're doing Bloons on YouTube and it's very unpredictable, I need to put a little bit more thought into how I'm going to manipulate the environment so I get the targets that I want. But doable. And that was a great session with him. And we were literally just watching somebody play a game on YouTube.
Yeah, I think it aligns with that. That might sound weird to people listening, but how weird is it to watch somebody play football or basketball, right? But that's right. But and that's so many kids like, well, I like to. That's a game, and I like people watching people do that. Well, this is another game that I like people watch. Like people. Yeah. And like you said, screening and pausing and giving so many opportunities to discuss what was happening is such a language-rich opportunity. Cool. Yeah,
absolutely.
All right. So I have, I think maybe one last sort of big question to ask you, and that is something I absolutely loved from our presentation. That point that you made is that there is, when it comes to therapy, so often students it's not necessarily communicated to them that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this is where we're going. And then it's going to end. Will be out of therapy. It can often feel like it's just going to go on forever, and it's not really explained to a student that that there is that ending point. But you say you make it really clear, or you try and make it as clear as possible. And one way of doing that is through gamification. So can we talk a little bit about gamifying? What does that mean versus games, and how that ties into a beginning, middle, and end, and all that whole thing?
So what I did about 3 years ago, I kind of started to use this metaphor of therapy as a video game. And that, I explained to the kids that when we're in therapy, our goal is to get the highest level. Our highest level is in real life. When you can do your targets in real life, you are ready to graduate. And that form, so I illustrated it with a rocket. So the form that we're talking about, it's available on my website. So there's a link for free printables. And so if you put in the free printables and you signed up, this form is available. It's a one-pager, and there's a picture of a rocket. And under the rocket, there are a bunch of levels. So our level is words, then phrases, then sentences, then in real life. And in each of those levels, there are levels of mini levels, right? That we're not, I shouldn't say many obstacles that we're looking to get over. So for the first 3 of those levels, it's really how much support does the child need? Can you do the sound in words? Do you need a lot of help? Do you need some help? Do you need no help? Well, if you need no help in words, we're ready to move on to phrases. And if you need no help, and I have to say, sometimes kids jump levels in one session. This doesn't have to be week to week to week. Like it's versatile. You adapt it to the child's needs. And then we're looking at in real life. Now, in real life, we up the ante. It's not just how much support you need. It's how frequently you need that support. Like if I need to correct you once a day, that's very different than I need to correct you every single conversation. Mm-hmm. And also the speed, because I think we get to a point in therapy where the parents will tell me, like they use their sounds most of the time, but when they're tired, when they're excited, when they're sick, we start to see a drop. There is a phenomenon in childhood practice of speech where actually we see an improvement sometimes in kids when they're sick, sometimes. But I think it's just maybe those are just standing out because they're so like it's such a bizarre phenomenon, right? So, but I then want to see. So I have a little symbol for rate. Are you using your target when you're going super fast? Can you hold on to that accuracy when things are exciting and fast and going at that speed? And I've always really liked game metaphors. Like I have a YouTube channel, and on one of the earliest videos was talking about speech as a basketball game, like basketball as a metaphor. And so when we're in our therapy sessions, that's like learning to dribble or learning to shoot or learning to do a layup, whatever. It's been like 30 years since I played basketball, so you'll excuse me, that's not some of the terminology. And then our next step is to play an in-house game, right? To play the basketball game with your team. And that's the equivalent of doing therapy in the therapy session where I am the cue. The activity is the cue. Everything here is a cue. And then in real life, that's the away game. That's where you don't know what's coming at you. You don't know the strategies of the team. You have people yelling at you, people from the crowds yelling at you. That's like your brother and sister nagging you while you're just trying to get your message across. And mom is telling you have to think about your S. Like, I need this now, right? And so I've always kind of had games as a metaphor for what happens in the therapy session. And the video game was a really neat way to explain that. And I have to say, it was actually like recently very, very helpful because I was in a session where I felt so bad, like the sessions don't always go how we want. And I had a parent who was jumping in to keep correcting the child. I understand that the parent is only doing this with good intention, right? To help her kid. But she's not seeing the levels that we're working on words, and this child is not ready yet for a whole full sentence. And so the next week I brought out the sheet and I explained it to the child. And you could see the parent understood now the trajectory of therapy. And it wasn't in a way where I was, lecturing. Like it was just this very natural way of explaining what we're doing, explaining it to the child without being, in any way rude to the parent. Mm-hmm. And kind of got us all on the same page and what we're working towards. I think, for parents, they'll think like he knows how to do an R. Why doesn't he do it all the time? Knowing how to do something is very different than doing it all the time. And we get this intuitively as therapists, but it is not intuitive to most people. Just because you can write in perfect calligraphy doesn't mean that every single time you write, you're going to write in perfect calligraphy. Mm-hmm. Some things take time, and motor skills take time. Language takes time. Changing behavior takes time. And this tool, like explaining that something in real life is very different than in a highly structured environment, that's an important message to send to our parents that we're working with and to send to the kids, because you are buying yourself time as a therapist. Like you need that time, and you need them to understand this is not a magic pill that we're going to give. It's going to take time. I think I wish I had really known that when I had graduated, because when we first came out, I always felt like, oh, it's because I don't have experience. Like this isn't working because I don't have experience, because I don't know what I'm doing, because I'm so new at it. And, now that I do have experience, I know it's not because I'm like magic. Yeah, sure. I've gained a lot of skills over time. I've gained some tricks, like my ear is more attuned to what the kids are saying. I can now I have a better sense of this kid is going to be this long. Like, yes, there's definitely things that come with experience, but I still need time. Like, and when I'm in the field another 30 years, I will still also need time.
So Tali, you are so speaking my language here, and because this is something that Rachel and I talk about when it comes to coaching, when in reference to AAC and our own therapy skills, is that I might be able to tell you all about pick a strategy, let's say least to most prompting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be able to actually implement it. Maybe I could do that when it's a one-on-one situation, quiet with a student. Maybe I could do that. But now actually put it into play when there's 4 different students and there's assistants around and all of a sudden the bell's going off, it changes you. And so it takes practice, it takes coaching, it takes time to get better at that skill. In the same way, in the same way, to make that metaphor or analogy, that a student might be able to hit a target sitting at a table by themselves, but then when they're in a car with their cousins and there's music playing, and it's going fast, like then they might not be able to hit the target at that time. And you might even start to internalize that you're bad at this skill. But when you're like, oh man, I'm just not good at this. And you start down on yourself, whether again, as a professional trying to implement a strategy or as a student trying to implement a target. But what you're saying, or what I'm hearing you say, is by making making it very apparent, very visual, very right, like something that you can visualize, then you go, well, right, I'm just not there yet. I can do it not here, but I'll get there because it's progression. The rocket ship hasn't gotten as high as it needs to get yet.
Yeah, that's right. And I think as you go, like if you've mapped things out this way, I mean, it doesn't have to be the same images that I use, but if you've mapped things out as a step-by-step, you're also celebrating those accomplishments along the way. Our kids are struggling to do something that everybody else does naturally. Mm-hmm. Everybody else does what they are struggling to do without thinking twice. And we need to show them every step along the way. Those are huge accomplishments. And if my kids are doing something that's at the end of that, that's at the in real life stage, if they're doing that at the beginning, I tell the parents, like, what your child is doing, that is massive. Like that needs to be celebrated. We are so used to zeroing in on when kids make mistakes. Celebrate when they do things right.
And making it visual like that and gamifying it, like moving from, I think an analogy there is like scouting, right? You start at the Cub Scouts and you move your way up and you earn badges along the way. Or another one is that I think people can resonate with are like belts in martial arts, right?
Yeah.
You've earned your belt and you move forward. So celebrating that you have earned your next belt, you have moved up to, you started out as a Padawan and now you're that much closer to being a Jedi, or whatever analogy might be. Gamifying it makes it fun for people and sees those little increments as successes.
It's a path, right? And I think what at our ASHA presentation, what really struck me was, I think it was Beth who described games as a narrative. And I'd never really thought, I mean, as long as I've been doing this and I've been doing, this with books, I'd never thought of the game as a narrative, but really it is. We have characters, we have a protagonist, we have an antagonist, we have elements of surprise, we have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have, the word sounds so cheesy, but you have a journey, and all of these things are little metaphors for what our whole therapy is. We've got targets, we're hitting them.
I love it. All right, let me add sort of final question.
Yeah.
Is the way I like to end our interviews is with asking people what they're sort of curious about, what they're sort of wondering about, what they're questing after, what I'm sort of been thinking might come next for me, something like that, about reflecting on, I've been really thinking about this a lot lately.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I think, I don't know if it's very different than before, but I always am wondering how we put what we do on the map for people outside of what we're doing, to translate kind of the magic of what we do outside, where I'm going kind of in the next product in my business is sort of going along that lines. I really want to make a game that is not, you wouldn't look at it and think it's a speech game. There's going to be Easter eggs there for speech pathologists, but I want to take what we do and make it really accessible to to the population, to the civilians, to the people in the outside world. And I'm always thinking about that, like where has my thinking changed? I'm not thinking in the same way I did before I was a speech path and before I did this. And where are those bridges we can draw between what we're doing and how parents are thinking, how children are thinking, how people exist and live. You can tell I'm like, very immersed in what I do. And my head is always in that direction. And I'm also trying to get the perspective of the outsider coming in.
That is, again, you're speaking my language here, because the word that's screaming in my head right now is inclusion, right?
Yeah.
If someone else can take it, this game and play. You wouldn't even think of it as necessarily speech, but like you said, I love that idea of like Easter eggs there. Just an inclusive game that we're all sort of playing together. I just love that idea.
100%.
Awesome. All right. Well, so give us all the stuff. How can people find you? Where can they find your store? Give us the URLs. Give us your social media handles. People want to connect. Where do they reach you?
Thank you so much. So my store is www.thespeakboutique.com/store. So the website is thespeakboutique.com, and you can see kind of all about me there. And then /store is where the products and the product descriptions are. I do a lot on Instagram, so it's at The Speak Boutique. Make sure you have the in there. And I have a community page on Facebook. So for if you're interested in the book or if you've bought the book, it's called Tali's Party Animals Community. And so you can please join us. The Speak Boutique is on Facebook as well. I'm a little bit on Twitter, not so much. I'm still navigating that platform, but mostly on Instagram. Oh, and YouTube. So I do have a YouTube channel, and on that YouTube channel, I walk through the book. There's a tour of the book, and there's a tour of what's the story cards, which is a set of retail activities grown out of the book. And then I have What's That Sound, a collection of cards to show kids how we move our mouths for certain sounds. So it's cue cards for sounds, but also there's materials and instruction there to support phonemic awareness. Very, very important, because our kids with speech sound disorders are very much are vulnerable for literacy difficulties, even with a single artic error. Dr. Kelly Farquharson's research talks towards that. And so phonemic awareness is important to me. I have it in that deck. So that was my quick run through of where you can find me. But I'm very accessible. I'm happy to answer questions people have. Email me. I'm Tali at thespeakboutique.com, TALI.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing all that. Of course, we'll have that all linked in the show notes. And thank you so much for presenting together at ASHA. I'm so glad Beth Poss, she knows what she's doing, putting us together.
It was so great. It was so great. It was the best highlight of November for me. And thank you so much for having me here. I really, really enjoyed it.
Us too. Thank you so much for being here and sharing these strategies. And again, I'm Chris, and this is Tali for Talking with Tech.